Opinions. Everybody's got them, whether positive or negative, truthful or delusional. We all hold some form of opinions about the people, places, and things we interact with on a daily basis, which is why I wanted to find out your guys' opinion on the FPS genre. So I put out a tweet asking for your hot takes, and oh boy did you have some. Without any further delay, my name is Thrill, and let's read your hot takes. We need to stop hyping up games that people only play for a few days and then never touch again. I understand where you're coming from with this, but this is the worst possible thing to do if we want new and exciting games in the space. While yeah, it can get frustrating getting hyped for a project that ultimately fails, this kind of mindset that has built up over the past few years has led to the plague of people constantly declaring new and exciting games dead on arrival non-stop because they don't like the mechanics, the trailer, or whatever. It's okay to be skeptical, but completely shutting down the idea of getting hyped for a new game is bad for the future of the genre. At a competitive level, FPS games like Apex are harder than Valorant CSGO because RNG, so to consistently on top is more difficult. This opens up a whole can of worms that I'm not really looking to tackle in this video. Maybe someday I'll do a longer video on this topic, but to keep it a bit on the brief side, while yes, the RNG in most battle royales makes it hard to consistently on top, the RNG can also take away from the competitive nature of those games, given that the best players won't always be able to outplay the worst players if their loot isn't somewhat equal. So I'd say it kind of varies depending on the game you're playing, the RNG you get. Attack FPS as a genre has a certain hard ceiling when it comes to variety and growth, and because of that, I highly doubt there will ever be a time where there are an abundance of more successful attack FPS games than the mainstream ones we have now. Yes and no. While I do think that the basics of attack FPS games, such as the one life objective / round-based shooters has objective ceiling, there aren't that many limits to what you can build around that base idea. The problem recently so has been that most of these innovations were either too complex for the average player to understand, or forced into gameplay without any thought behind the meaning of the addition of the mechanics. Fragpunk. I do believe there's room for innovation in the attack FPS space. It just needs to be good innovation that has meaningful impact on the gameplay, and not just innovation for the sake of innovation. Competitive FPS titles with characters in them are ruined by capitalism in the pursuit to always add more to keep people interested. They reach a peak after 2 to 4 years, then become less fun because they are oversaturated with shit. I think the kind of problems you're outlining are more prevalent in games where characters have multiple abilities that all interact with each other differently. Marvel Rivals is a great example of this. Releasing 4 characters every few months with a combined 40 plus new abilities and game interactions is a great way to oversaturate the game and make people lose interest. However, in the case like Rainbow Six Siege, where every character has one new ability that interacts with a specific part of the game, I think there's less space for oversaturation. It's less a matter of too many characters like you suggested, and more a matter of too many abilities to learn and keep track of. People who complain about movement tech and shooters being fast need to just find a slower game or shut up and learn the game. Louder for the people in the back, please. One of the more exhausting things about recent FPS gaming has been the sheer amount of people non-stop bitching that games would dare have a skill gap in 2025. This is usually accompanied by the remark of, but I have a job, but I have school. Yeah, newsflash guys, so does everyone else. Being gainfully employed isn't an excuse for being bad. Suck it up and learn the mechanics or go back to single player games. Game training culture / community around it has become increasingly egotistical, full of idiots who over-prioritize aim, and it is now rarely used for its original purpose as a tool for improvement. Yep, very hard to disagree with this one, unless you're one of the egotistical parties mentioned. While aim is definitely an important part of your skill set, it isn't the only defining characteristic what makes a good player. Positioning, map knowledge, and game sense are just as, if not important than aim, and all the really top tier aimers that you probably look up to practice these along with aim. The greatest depth in games comes from tight limitations and simple base design with interesting applications, which forces greater creativity and depth of interaction from players, rather than devs creating the complexity and depth for players to discover on the devs' terms. There are definitely good games with the kind of complexity you're talking about in the latter half of your take here, but overall I agreed. It's why I think games like Counter-Strike, PUBG, and Team Fortress 2 have done as well as they have over the prolonged period they've been on the market. At the base, they're incredibly simple games and force the player to be creative with the limited tools they have. I would actually love to see more devs try the less is more approach nowadays, but with the current popularity of hero shooters and seasonal content, I don't see this happening anytime soon. Apex Legends is Walmart brand Titanfall, and I will die on this hill. Hey guys, I asked for hot takes, not objectively correct takes, but given that I now have a bit of time since it's the coldest take of the video, I'm gonna ask you to take a second to subscribe and turn on notifications if you're enjoying the video so far. It really does help the channel out. Alright, back to the hot takes. The games are decent, the communities just suck. I'm gonna bet money that while I was reading that take out, Everyone watching this video had a game with a community like this pop into their head, background fluidity potentially related. But yeah, a ton of the games the general perception is bad just have really toxic and crappy communities surrounding them. However, I do feel a need to point out that what good means here is entirely subjective to your own opinion on what is and isn't good, and one person's definition of good should not be used as a concrete definition for all FPS games. FPS games need to make punching stuff more satisfying. I want to lift up my enemies and slam them into the ground. I could definitely see this being applicable for single-player based games such as titles like Doom and Wolfenstein, where being a one-man army is the focus of the game. In games like that, it makes sense for the player character to be able to slam enemies around and have incredibly powerful punches. But in most traditional multiplayer FPS games, I couldn't help but feel like it would break established design philosophies of those games. I could see it being used in a title like Halo, where you are literally a super soldier in bionic armor, but for most titles, I feel like it would just fly completely in the face of the design language of the games. They need to stop making games with watered down mechanics and start rewarding skill again. Once again, louder for the people in the back, please. I feel like so many games nowadays are willingly watering down their mechanics in an attempt to try and attract the largest number of players possible. Whether it's by nerfing movement, adding ridiculous aim assist, or even adding bots to regular lobbies. Not only does this lower the mechanical ceiling, it also makes the games less fun overall. I personally don't find shooting bots fun, and I'd be inclined to agree that most of you watching would agree. But apparently modern devs are either deaf to the thousands of complaints about this, or FPS games have become so optimized for engagement that are making them easier to keep players engaged, and thus spend more money on the game. It's one of my biggest gripes with modern FPS gaming, and I'm glad to see that I'm not the only one who's noticing this, and that other players feel the same way I do. Skins were an inevitable part of game development, and it low-key ruined the scene. We went from Doom, Wolfenstein, or even CS to cotton candy shooters. For example, my beloved CS was developed as a mod passion project, and monetizing the game redirected the focus of the devs to money. There are parts of this take I agree and disagree with. For starters, I fully agree that skins were an inevitable part of development, especially with the advent of free-to-play games. Servers and development costs money, and people have shown, multiple times, they'll pay hand over fist for fancy weapons, silly costumes, and the ability to disrespect enemies with emotes. However, I have a slight issue with the second part of this take. We're still getting plenty of games that stick firmly to their original art styles and don't go crazy off the rails with the skins. Hell, as of recording this video, Doom the Dark Ages literally just released. However, I do think there's an easy fix that would make both sides of this argument happy. Just add an option that allows you to turn off all enemy skins client-side. This means people that want goofy skins can still use them, and people who don't like them won't have to see them in their games. It also fixed the issue of devs actually adding skins that are impossible to see across the map that lead to unfair deaths. It probably takes a lot of work to make something like this work, but the payoff seems to be very, very worth it in my opinion, and I would like to see this added into future FPS games. Kernel level anti-cheat won't solve cheating, it'll only make it more expensive in the short term. I don't want to touch on this one too much because I am planning on doing a video talking about anti-cheats at length. However, at a base level, you are correct. Cheaters will always try to find a way around the walls put in place by the developers, no matter the time or the monetary cost to them. There is currently no end-all be-all solution to this cat and mouse game, and while there have been some ideas thrown around, they range from either impractical to borderline psychotic. Seriously, I've seen people suggesting throwing children in jail for life for cheating on a video game. I'm gonna table this one here and revisit in the full video I'm working on. However, don't hold your breath for that video. I want to properly research this topic in depth before I make the video, so it's gonna be at least a couple months out. Subscribe so you don't miss it. Alright, and then, fuck, this is a long one. Okay, let's break these down one at a time. For starters, the aim skill floor for comp games is too low. I think it depends on the game. For example, the aim skill floor in something like Rainbow Six Siege is going to be far different from the floor in something like Apex Legends. It all depends on several factors of the game, with the biggest one in my opinion being the pace of play. Too many team-oriented games. I do agree with this one. It'd be nice to see games nowadays try and give people who prefer to fly solo more options to play, other than being able to go in alone against teams, or forced to play with people you don't know and may not even want to communicate with. However, given the lack of these kinds of games, I'd imagine trying to design and balance games like this is an absolute nightmare. SBMM is actually good, but only for games that require strategizing. Yes, 100% yes. Why on earth do we need SBMM in a game like Battlefield, where it's effectively two teams that are composed of 32 smaller teams? The sample size alone is enough to properly balance the majority of matches. Even if some games ended up blowouts, the amount of these that happen in the older Battlefields without SBMM was so few and far between, I don't think it's a big enough issue to require balancing everyone based on skill, which would also increase the queue times and overall ruin the magic of what makes these kinds of games fun. Games that remove movement viability are actively crippling the player, literally. 3 for 4. While I can understand fixing movement tech that's actually just exploits, such as Siege's old bolo leans or that time in TF2 where Scout could outrun his hitbox, I think giving players freedom of expression by a movement is a great idea, especially in team-based games where each player has a role to fill, such as entry and support. Not to mention that making games are either designed to be fast, or games that are fast and retroactively making them slower, harms the pace of play and will end up killing the fun for the majority of players. And finally, we've lost the plot on player expression. 80% right, you get a B. It feels like nowadays, players are forced on a general path of expression rather than being free to truly express themselves. And while I can point to several factors, my biggest belief is that this is primarily a consequence of the hero-based game becoming so popular. Your only form of expression is via the abilities that particular hero has. I'd like to see more games open the freedom of expression more, whether that be through changing your loadout, the abilities you can equip, or even through the design of the maps. Alright, the thermometer here says we're getting it too hot, so I'm going to leave the video here. If you would agree or disagree with any of the takes, leave a comment so we can have some civil discussions down below. Oh, who am I kidding? That's not fucking happening. But in all seriousness, thank you for watching all the way to the end. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and subscribe if you want to see more in the future. My name is Thrill, and I'll see you all next time. Later.